Russ, thanks for joining us. You just came from the AFM Forum on First Nations rights, title, and jurisdiction. What's your take on what the minister had to say this morning?
Well, I listened to the minister's speech carefully, and it seemed to be more of a public relations speech than anything, because it bore no resemblance to the overview document that was released by the federal government today. And actually, one of the delegates got up and pointed that out to the minister.
Yeah, Russ, you've been sounding the alarm on this proposed recognition and implementation of Indigenous rights framework for months now, if not longer. And today, as you mentioned, we've seen a growing number of people share that concern. What do you make of the growing resistance within the AFN to the framework?
Well, you know, I think it's becoming clear. There has been a process going on where they have an Indigenous lawyers expert group that has been involved in discussions, I guess, in drafting the engagement document, which is supposed to frame what the legislation will contain. And they're starting to raise concerns now. I've seen comments from Mary Ellen Turpel Lafond, you know, showing her concern, and there's that letter that went, you know, to the Prime Minister from several Indigenous lawyers. So I take their views as much softer than mine, and when I see them raising the alarm, it validates a lot of what I've been saying, I think. When you have all these lawyers lining up saying, whoa, wait a minute, that you're not even recognizing existing laws with this proposed legislation.
Russ, Minister Bennett said explicitly today that this framework is not the 1969 white paper. What are your thoughts on her saying that?
I think technically she's right. It's not the 1969 white paper, but it definitely contains the tenets or the objectives in that 1969 white paper of changing the legal and political status of First Nations in a way that is very threatening. That's why I would still say it's a termination legislation, not recognition legislation, because they're still putting conditions and wanting First Nations to come before a committee to be to see if they meet the criteria for federal recognition of being a nation. They're even proposing, you know, them having the same rights as a natural person, which basically means a corporation. So they're looking, the nation-to-nation relationship that they're talking about is much different than what our peoples have talked about and what the treaties recognized.
Last week, Idle No More, the Truth Campaign, and Defenders of the Land, for which you're a spokesperson, issued a statement denouncing the framework, calling on grassroots people to begin mobilizing. And, you know, grassroots people aren't part of the consultation process, so what role can they play as this framework unfolds?
Well, I think we need to put a stop to it. That's what we've said. We've done a breakdown of the engagement document that's been out for a while. You know, they just released a new one, but the new one just contains more details. The framework is the same. So we've asked our elders to start a process of prayer when Parliament resumes on September 17th, and for us to start mobilizing our people. So we're planning on having some webinars and teach-ins and getting information out to our people to get them aware of this issue, because, you know, even though this process has been going on for quite a while, and certainly since the Prime Minister made his Valentine's Day speech, it's really being done in a top-down national engagement process, which is really deceptive because there's only certain people that have been invited. And so the process itself has been not inclusive and not transparent. So many people don't even know about this yet. And so I intend on making this point at some point during the forum that we're going to work outside of AFN to work with our grassroots peoples and mobilizing them to put a stop to this legislation and to demonstrate we're opposed to it. And we're going to call on Canadians who support us to help us on that as well. I'm hoping to see at least the NDP and the Green Party representatives in Parliament support our opposition to this legislation.
Well, Russ, lots to talk about on this legislation. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there, but I appreciate you taking some time for us here today.
Thank you very much for having me.